What's good YouTube? Welcome to my channel, Last in Conditioning. Here's the truth about training volume recommendation that nobody's telling you. There are some things to consider, namely your age, training experience, exercise selection, and your total number of sets per week. I will break down these points as we go along. First, I would like to start with the number of total sets that you do in a week, not just per muscle group, but as an entirety along with your exercise selection, and why these two things matter a lot more than you are led to believe. Firstly, exercise selection in terms of your workload or your total work volume. You can do a lot of lateral raises or general isolation work versus compound work. It's going to be significantly less fatiguing, both nervous system, but also as a systemic factor. Systemic, that's the body as a whole, versus local, which is just going to refer to one area. If you only do lateral raises, you can do a metric ton of them without actually generating much fatigue at all, simply just because of the sheer load or lack thereof that you can actually do on a lateral raise versus what you could do on an overhead press. This is why this matters. 5 sets of lateral raise is not going to create anywhere near the same amount of fatigue as 5 sets of overhead pressing, both systemically but also locally. This matters a lot. Even though we will refer to as both as a shoulder exercise, those 5 sets on both sides are not created equal. It's basically like comparing someone with a 1-liter engine versus a 6-liter engine and see who can go the furthest. It's not anywhere near the same. Now, the reason why this matters is simply because if you are led to believe that you should do 10, 15, 20 sets per muscle group per week, and if you are doing the majority of that in terms of compound movements, so let's say you're doing 14 sets of overhead press per week, but only 6 sets of isolation work, and you are talking about how you are extremely tired and beat down, that would actually be the reason why. Versus if you actually did the inverse, where you did 6 sets of overhead pressing per week, but 14 sets of isolation, and you would not have the same feeling or the same grade of fatigue. This matters, even though if we break it down on both sides, it's both 20 sets for shoulders. But the big difference is if you're doing more isolation based, you can handle a lot more and it's going to be a lot less fatiguing, versus if you do a lot more compound based, you're going to have to do less, simply because of the sheer load that you can lift on an overhead press versus a lateral raise. This matters a lot. This is why exercise selection actually matters quite a bit more than a lot of these science-based lifters will lead you to believe, because they will just say X amount of sets per week per muscle group, and it just doesn't necessarily really translate. The third thing that matters quite a lot is your age, and your age matters for 2 primary reasons. One, just when you're younger, you just flat out going to recover faster. You can't really get around it that if you're 16, you're going to recover significantly faster at 16 than you are at 32. You're just going to recover faster, and that's okay. But it's something to consider in terms of your programming and your total workload. The other thing why the age matters, someone at 16 has quite significantly less responsibilities versus someone who is 32, which also matters, because the more responsibilities and the more life choices that you have, the worse your recoverability will actually be. So this is why your physical or biological age matters a lot when we're talking about the programming. How much can you handle? Now, another thing that matters, but that will only be when you're a bit older, what job do you have? Do you have a physical demanding job, or are you an office worker? These things matters as well, because if you're doing a lot of physical labor in your day-to-day life, you probably can't tolerate that high workload. You probably have to do less and be a lot more smart about your approach to training. Otherwise, you may actually end up with overuse problems. Thanks for watching. Last in Conditioning.